Welcome everybody to the Rising Network. My name is Lily Cheng and I'm the founder of the Rising Network. And welcome to today's masterclass workshop with Mahjooba, who is the CEO of R.E.P Institute, for today's session on the basics of project management. So in today's session, what you will learn: what is project management, what principles are involved in project management, what common tools and techniques are used in project management, how the processes of project management are applied to a project, and how best work with your stakeholders, so the best way to communicate, keeping them up to date with progress. So Mahjooba, I'd like to now hand over to you.
Hello. Oh my God, I'm so excited to be here, talk about project management, something I absolutely love. So let me go ahead and start sharing my presentation with all of you. So do me a favor, right at the bottom of your screen, you see those little reactions. It says reactions. Let me know how you're feeling. Clap, give me some smiley faces. Lily, can you see my screen? All good there?
Yeah,
excellent. Yay, I see the thumbs up. I see some smiley faces, some party hats going on over here. I love it. Okay, what better than project management, right? For us to spend an hour together to talk about this amazing topic, because everything around us is a project, and we know that, right? And so project management is it's a discipline that you can actually get your PhD in. Today, we're going to be really touching the surface, but hopefully you're going to walk away with enough information where it will spark your curiosity, or that you go and you implement some of these concepts on your own job. So let me continue on here. 3T Institute, just to give you an intro, right, is a post-vocational school here in the United States, actually in Northern Virginia, and I'll talk to all of you a little bit later about that. But today what we're also going to cover is the different certifications. If you're interested in getting your CAPM or PMP, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about project quality management, scope, how the 3T works in terms of teaching you some of these concepts, risk management. And after this, I do have a few tools that I will be sending over to Lily so that she can hand it to you, and that's what you're seeing there. About me, I am the CEO of 3T Institute that was established about 2 years ago. I myself have 15 years of having worked on projects from the World Bank to USAID, Department of Veterans Affairs here in the United States, Department of Defense, private healthcare institutions. So you name it, I have done government and both private sector project management. My educational background, I have an MBA in IT project management. I am a certified PMP project management professional. I also have my Agile certification. What else? And, and above it all, I just love to talk about project management, infuse knowledge, and share it with all of you. So if at any point this gets boring, that means that I've maybe lost some of my passion in project management. Are you guys still with me? Can I see the emojis? Everyone's there? Yeah, good? Okay, perfect. Thank you, Stephanie. Okay, so introduction to project management, right? What do we know about projects? We know projects are just temporary. They don't go on forever, and they have a beginning and an end. So that means every project is going to have a start and a finish. So when you talk about projects, you want to make sure that you stick to this definition of it. Otherwise, you're really working on operations. And so it always is important to start with the basic definition. What is a project to begin with, right? Now, we know that it has a start and a finish date, but ultimately you're starting projects to produce a product, a unique service, or to reach a result. Project management is not specific to an industry. You have projects in research, you have projects in engineering, you have projects in creating weapons, rockets, healthcare, you name it, project management is there. So there, when you think of a project, think of it, it's an endeavor that has a start and finish. You're producing something that doesn't go on forever. So different than operations, right? But there's also the fact that organizations don't have unlimited funds. We, as organizations, we have to think about what projects do we want to take up. So if you're looking at this diagram, really projects are there to take us from one state to the next, or from a current state to the future state. So as an organization, you really have to say, if I initiate this project, what changes am I going to have? What will be the benefits? What's the end objective? What's my mission here that I'm going to accomplish? So always think about when an organization, or if you're part of the decision making at the enterprise level, or either if you're working at the granular side of things on a project, always say, why did this project get started? What does the project charter say? So questioning that ensures that you're within your scope. So when we think about value creation, right? How many of us have been on projects where you're like, hold on, wait a minute, why are we doing this again? Is it bringing us money? Is there stockholder equity in this? Is there utility, fixtures, tools, market share? What is it? What are the tangible benefits, right? But there's also intangible benefits of project management. Organizations such as Coca-Cola, or, excuse me, the Deloittes of the world, PwCs of the world will have intangible projects. Why? For goodwill, for brand recognition, public benefit, trademarks, strategic alignment. A lot of times organizations will start projects because they want to be in a market that is unique, or they want to kind of discover to see if there are profitable benefits there. So strategic alignment could be a reason why you're starting projects. And there's also reputation, right? How many times have you seen maybe in the market where a company's reputation has gone down, and all of a sudden they're, starting a 5K race, or supporting maybe cancer research, whatever it may be. So there can be many reasons. What all of you need to walk away with is, what's the purpose? What's my value creation for this particular project? Now let's talk about this framework of project management. If you're looking at this, you might go a little dizzy, like, oh my God, what is this? But let me explain what you're looking at. And what I'm referencing right now is the Project Management Book of Knowledge, 6th edition. The Project Management Book of Knowledge is going, excuse me, through a change. A 7th edition is coming out in August. However, what the 7th edition will have is it's more of a practitioner's guide. The 6th edition goes into the details of the process. So let's review this together. Let me get my annotation pen out here so I can kind of draw while I am showing you. And let me pick a little. I think this is good. All right. And excuse the coughing. I have this terrible allergy that I can't get rid of. I did take my allergy pill. But let's start from here. We have the 5 process groups right on top. So no matter what project you're working on, whether it's agile, right? That's a methodology of project management, or using waterfall. A project lifecycle will always have these 5 process groups, starting with initiating, leading into planning. Executing is where you get the work done. Then you're monitoring, controlling, and then you're closing the project. What you're seeing right under these categories are what are known as processes. So if you're in the initiating process group, what you're doing there is you're developing your charter. Basic document that everyone needs to get signed off to say, we all agree what the value of this project is. We all agree on the high-level milestones, some risks, and a budget. You as a project manager are named in there within that document. Your sponsor signs it, and some key stakeholders. And then once you're done with that, right under the initiating process group, you're going to identify all of the individuals that are going to get impacted by your project, both positively and negatively. Sometimes we think about a project and we say, oh, who's going to see this change? But there's some people who can get indirectly impacted by a project that you need to consider as part of your stakeholder list. Now, when we get into the planning process group, this is where you're creating all of your fancy documents. So again, and we can't go through all of this because it is very extensive. However, what you do want to know that as a PM, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So what we're taught here in terms of a Project Management Institute's framework of project management, or really any standard, is PMs don't forget to plan. And that's exactly what we're doing. And that's because when you're in executing, you no longer have time to plan. You're going to utilize all of your plans to execute your project. And this is where you see all of your different processes. And the commonality here is in the language. Look at the language here. It says direct and manage project work, manage project knowledge, adjectives. That means this is action-packed. You have your plans, and according to your plans, you are now working on this project. But we're not done there, right? I always call monitoring and controlling the policing of a project. It's almost revolving. When you envision it, you say, okay, I'm working on this project, but hey, am I doing everything okay? Am I following my plans? And that's what monitoring and controlling is all about. Take a look at these processes. Validate, control schedule, control cost, control quality. This is a very important aspect of your project. So a PM who fails to look at variances will never know whether their project is healthy or not. Variances in cost, variances in schedule, variances in resources. What about retention? Am I able to keep my resources intact? So very, very rich here in terms of how you need to be thinking about a project. And then finally, we have close project or phase. A lot of times the misconception is, okay, in the closing is where I'll close out all the procurements, I'll maybe pay my vendors, or I'll look at variances. No, closing is really just one process. As you can see, you're doing some lessons learned there, and you're saying, okay, did we accomplish our goal? Looking at the business, the benefits management plan or the business case, did we meet our objective? Did we meet the value that we wanted to? Capturing those lessons learned and then filing them away. And maybe there's going to be some issues with contractors. There might be some claims administration that you may be doing in the closing process group as well. Everyone with me so far? Yep, can I see those emojis? All right, perfect. Okay, well, that means we're gonna have more fun. Awesome. I wonder if I have to move the screen. Sorry, guys. Let me get the mouse back here. Okay. If you're interested in becoming a certified PM, right, there is the PMP certification. It's one of the top tier certifications globally. Right now, there are 1 million PMs, certified PMs out there, and I have all of my little eraser things here. Let me erase that quickly. But I did want to touch base on this, right? Because it's a rich discipline and you can really get into a lot of these different processes. But knowing that when you add knowledge and you get the certification, you really are increasing your demand in the job market. You're telling your organization and your management that, hey, look, not only do I have experience, but I have the knowledge of, I'm certified to have the knowledge of project management based off of a standard. Those that get their PMP do see that they're picked up faster in the job market and that they earn 25% more than those who don't have the certification. Oh, gotta go back to the mouse. So I want to get into the exam format really quickly, if those that are interested. The exam is about 4 hours long. It does include, some agile concepts and waterfall concepts in there. I would say from a difficulty perspective, you're looking at it about being a 6 or 7. It does require some consistency and learning, but really you're capable of doing it. You do have to have some requirements in terms of the years of having worked on a project to qualify for the PMP. So for the PMP, you would need to come in with 3 years of having worked on a project. And 35 hours of education in order to even sit for that exam. But for the CAPM, that's more entry level. So that's where you're trying to just get into the field. You're doing some volunteer project management work, but you don't have to have PM experience requirements there. And that requires 23 hours of education in project management based on PMI's standard of knowing how to manage or execute a project. The format, I'm not going to read all of this, but the format is multiple choice with selecting multiple selections and looking at some graphs and maybe pointing to some things that the question is asking. In terms of the distribution of questions, it does go into testing your knowledge based on the 5 process groups. And so as you can see in the CAPM, it does test your overall knowledge, where the PMP now at an expert level really focuses on the, a more concrete knowledge questions of, do you understand things more from a process group, versus CAPM is knowledge area. The timeline, if you're interested, PMI.org, you do want to jot that down. PMI.org, they're the Project Management Institute, globally known. They've been around for 30 years, and they are the ones who certify you as a PM. So this is kind of the journey. You do have to meet the requirements. You do have to obtain the 35 hours of education, and then you go in, you prepare for the exam, you go in, and you pass. So now that we've kind of talked about the PMP, and I can watch for the chat box if anyone has any questions, or we can also take it towards the end. But I'm going to go over, we saw that process chart together. It's impossible to go through all of it, but what I've done is I've picked some specific processes that I feel like are very important for you to learn from a project management. One of the first ones is scope management. Now, scope management is key to the success of your project because it's all about requirements. If you don't know what your project's requirements are, you don't have them prioritized, you haven't engaged the right stakeholders, you may not have a good project or a failed one. Is scope management, right? It falls within the planning process group because, again, we're going to be planning in advance. What we're going to have in our plan is how to define scope, validate, and control. So really important to have that within your plan. What are the key benefits? It allows you, or it gives you guidance to say, here's how I'm going to be managing my requirements on this project. You want to think about those things in advance because in the midst of a project, if you think about how you've wasted time and resources, and there would be delays. So the benefit in pre-planning allows you to not fail in the midst of your project. So when we think about plan scope management, right, you want to stay to the original scope of what was determined. If you're working in an agile environment, right? There's waterfall, there's agile. I know I haven't covered a lot about agile, and we are going to have a workshop on that. But when it comes to requirements changing, you have to look at your organization and the industry you're in. For example, if you are in the construction industry, you are going to have all of your requirements up front, and you know what? You can't have any scope creep, or you have to stick to the original scope, or else materials will go to waste, and then you almost have a new project. There's 2 words here that I really want all of you guys to jot down that they're interesting in terms of vocab. What is scope creep? Scope creep is when you have uncontrolled expansion of your product or project scope. How many of us have seen that? Put in the chat box. How many times are you part of a project and someone says, hey, can we add this to this project, please? It's uncontrolled expansion. No one's calculating quality. No one's calculating schedule delays. We're just adding things, right? How many of you seen that? What about gold plating? When you want to impress your customer and you're like, sure, I'll add a Siri function that you want, even though we never added that into our requirements document. So gold plating is when you're trying to overly impress your customer, but it doesn't really benefit them, and they might not really even want it. But because you feel like, oh, it might make an impact, you're gold plating. Both of these are no-nos. Stick to the requirements. Stick for what you're getting paid for. Plan accordingly, and don't go outside of that. There's more respect in that as an organization, as a PM, when you stick to the boundaries you have created versus trying to gold plate. Here what I've done is I've gone a little detail into, okay, what do we really need to create a scope management plan? Now, we know our initial document is a project charter. The information from the charter will come into your scope management plan. You will have an overall project management plan that there may be some parts that you've drafted already. Some of that information will come in here. Look at that project lifecycle description, right? This is where we determine, are we going to be more of a step-by-step kind of project, or are we going to be fluid in our process and be okay with change and use agile, right? This is the decisions that you're making. What are some of the influences you have to consider? Market changes, organizational changes, CEO might be leaving, a new CIO might be coming into place. What does that mean for your project? So when we say EEFs, these are enterprise environmental factors, everything external, internal that you have to think about. Organizational process assets. And put this in the chat box. How many times has your organization decided they're going to do a Windows upgrade, but they don't have the infrastructure? They never thought about the infrastructure before trying to initiate a new project. So now what you're having to do is you pause on a project that you wanted to because you have to fix the infrastructure. Has anyone gone through that? I know I have. So there's some tools that you have to think about, right? As a PM, there's a lot of data analysis. Your analytical skills are key to project management. Nothing's on the surface when it comes to being a PM. It really is, let me look at the root cause. Let me do data analysis. Let me collect this information, understand what this means. So there's that part of it as a PM that if you don't have that analytical side of you and you're interested in PM work, you definitely want to ensure that you kind of touch on that. Ultimately, what you're going to have is scope management plan that's going to be intact. That will describe what the boundaries of your project are, how you're going to manage scope requirements on your project. And guess what? The whole team will know what you're doing versus everything just being in people's minds. You now have a document that just says, here's the process for preparing scope. Creating your WBS. How do we say what our baseline is? So we're not gold plating, we're not scope creeping, right? And this is a formal document that has to be signed. So, when we have those formal documents and we put them on a repository where everyone can see it, you will have more consistency. You also have a requirements management plan. There are many plans. So again, I've picked things where I think might be helpful, and you may also need a requirements management plan, right? Are you going to have use cases? What are the scripts that people are going to use when they're testing the software product, right? And so some of those things, configuration management, I get this question a lot. What is configuration management? It's your ability to make sure that people are not using an older version of a document, simply put, right? We do have to, there's this aspect of collecting requirements. What do your customers really want? This is a formal process, right? And here, PMs, what you have to do is engage everyone. You know what? Even if you think someone's not impacted, ask them. Get requirements for every single one of your stakeholders. Put in your chat box if you've ever had the experience of someone calling you or emailing you to say, hey, this project impacts my department. This is the first time I've heard of this. If you've gone through that, that means not all stakeholders were identified properly and they were not engaged in the collecting requirements process. So when you are collecting these requirements, you will need to bring in your documents, charter, the plan, the requirements plan, and look at that, your stakeholder engagement plan. That's also one where you're trying to determine who are my stakeholders and how do they like to be communicated with. So very thorough, but again, part of collect requirements is data gathering. You have to brainstorm, right? Let's think about this. What's going on? What are these requirements? Who's impacted, right? Susan from the SharePoint department doesn't like this change that we're moving to Teams, but guess what? The organization wants to move to Teams. Let's involve Susan. You have to interview Susan, right? To say, Susan, I know this is hard, but look, we have to make this change, right? Having that conversation, the interpersonal skills is what's going to help you meet your project's objectives. You may need to build focus groups, bringing folks together. Let's talk about what we need to do here. What are the requirements? What's the product, service, or result that we're trying to get at? And you can use all sorts of tools out there, an Excel sheet, SharePoint, Teams. You can have a moderator. You can facilitate the conversation. So really think about how you can effectively have these data gathering sessions where they're organized and to the point. You may need to do some benchmarking, right? Is there another product, service, or result out there similar to mine? What does that mean? What will our requirements look like? What are the quality standards that we have to think about? So a lot to really think about there. A lot of folks create questionnaires and surveys. If you've ever done questionnaires and surveys, they're wonderful. What's a tool you can use? Use SurveyMonkey, right? I think that's what it's called. Simplify it. Overcomplicating things adds to the process, adds to the confusion, and creates roadblocks. So simplify things as much as you can. You're going to make some decisions here. And you can use voting, unanimity, majority, polarity. You can't use all of these at the same time. You have to pick what decision method you're going to select. But when it comes to collecting requirements, you're going to have to make some decisions, and not everyone's going to be happy. And here's another thing, right? In terms of project management, you cannot make everyone happy. There's the project objectives you have to meet, and then there's everyone's happiness. And unfortunately, both of those sometimes don't exist in the real world, right? Conflict is natural on a project. Who here has gone through butting heads on projects where you're like, requirements or happiness, right? And so it's like, okay, let's go back to the charter. What's our objective here? You can organize your data. Here's a tool known as an affinity diagram. So if all of these terminologies are kind of new to you, jot them down, or you can always relook at this and really look it up in detail. You can have mind mapping. So all kinds of things there, right? There's nominal group techniques. So I do want to touch base on this really, really quickly. A lot of times individuals are intimidated by speaking their minds. You want to be able to capture everyone's requirements, even from the shy technical individuals, even from the introverts. How can you get everyone's input when collecting requirements and making sure you've captured, you have touched everyone, even the ones that are shy in speaking up in public? Facilitated workshops are excellent. You can utilize those. And prototypes. Sometimes organizations will ask for prototypes. And you can utilize those as well. Context diagram, showing relationships, how everything kind of fits in. You can organize your requirements in a matrix of some sort. Doesn't have to be complicated, but if you look up at RTM, you can actually, there's many templates out there that you can utilize, or you can redo your SharePoint site that way as well. So a lot of information here. You guys still with me? So part of the other part is, right, when you are collecting requirements, ultimately you have to say, what is it that we brought in? What is our scope? Defining is part of that. Now, really creating that description to say, here's what it is. And in terms of when I say inputs, these are additional documents that you're bringing in to define that scope, because it has data that you're going to utilize. And there's, of course, product analysis that you're going to use here, right? And then when you have your output, that means at the end of this process, what did you get? In your project, when you're done with defining a scope, you have a project scope statement. That's going to say, what's your product description, your deliverables, and here's a note that I want you to take. Acceptance criteria and project exclusions. Not only do we talk about what is part of a project, but we talk about what is not part of a project. So you may have some assumptions, you may update some of your requirements documentations, and so on. And now we're getting to the WBS. A lot of projects will create a WBS so they can visually see how their work packages are divided into individual activities. And that's what you're seeing here. And a WBS, has anyone created a WBS here before? WBS stands for work breakdown structure. If you have, let me know. And so essentially, you can do this in Visio. You can do it in Word. There's fancy tools. You can or cannot, you don't have to utilize it. But this is a great way to go to your manager and say, here's everything that's part of the project and isn't. And it's broken down at the activity level where we can assign cost and resources to. Excellent tool. So if you're scratching your head in terms of how do I show what's part of my project, WBS is something that's going to help you. So, it is done in the planning process group early on so that you have that. And you want to bring in your project management plan, some project documents that are going to be key here. And in order for you to create your WBS, there's some influences you have to consider. But ultimately, when you have your WBS, this is what it's going to look like. This is an example of a bicycle, creating a bicycle. As you can see, it can be very granular. So, and the numbering is very important. Those numberings are there because it identifies the specific work package, and then it relates that work package to the set activities. And at the end, when you have your WBS, you now really understand what's my scope baseline, right? You have a WBS and you have a WBS dictionary, a dictionary that identifies what each of your components are. Then, so now that we're done with the planning aspect of it, we get into monitoring and controlling. We planned, we created everything we needed to. Now let's validate. Validation is you taking those deliverables that you created according to your scope and requirements and saying to your customer, is this good with you? And they sign off, right? It does have to go through some quality processes, of course, beforehand. And that's really what I have here, right? Before you can validate, it needs to go through quality control. And which quality control is in terms of your process. And then control quality, not to confuse everyone, is of your product. So you do have to go through these two before you can validate your deliverables with your customer. There's some tools and techniques that you're going to utilize. One of them, because it's a product, you're going to use inspection. And at the end, you're going to have some accepted deliverables. So the reason I've broken this down in this way is because even though some of us do this in the real world, we don't think of it in this systematic process, but you're doing this. And I have individuals who discount their PM experience and say, I don't think I've done project management. But if you look back and you look at the way this is being described, bet you anything, you have a whole lot of PM experience. If you agree with me, I would love to see it in the chat box. But yeah, that's part of it, right? And then what's control scope? It's about saying, let's maintain that baseline, right? No gold plating, influencing the changes before they happen, determining whether this change is even necessary, right? And managing that change before it happens. Part of control is, I talked about variance analysis, trend analysis. Where am I trending towards? What's going on here? If I'm going at this pace right now, what would be the future trend? Quality goes hand in hand with scope, and that's why I've kind of picked that here, right? We plan for quality. We bring in our key documents when we're creating our quality management plan. Really important here, because without these inputs, you can't have a fully vetted quality management plan. And there's some assumptions, requirements, your RTM, your risks. Remember that in everything that you do as a PM, your risk is always there in the back of your mind. Of course, you're going to be doing some benchmarking. What are the quality standards in the industry right now? And some brainstorming around that and interviews. There's also cost benefit analysis. And I want to pause here in a quick reflection, right? A lot of us, we think about quality and we say we want the best of the best. But is best of the best really necessary, right? If you think about an automation tool, Could we utilize an automation tool that's going to meet our requirements? Do we have to have the one that's like 5-star? Could the 4-star meet our demands and also save us some money? So at every point, you do have to do that cost benefit analysis and think of, you know, and then there's another aspect of it, which is the cost of quality. There's cost to thinking about quality and actually conforming to it. And there's also cost to non-conformance. And that's what this diagram right here shows you. Preventive cost and cost of just saying, hey, you know what? I won't spend any money on quality because I'm okay with the getting sued or doing rework or scraps or anything like that. So there's tools here, you know, multi-decision criteria analysis tools that allows you to look at quality a little closer. You have mind mapping as a tool that you can definitely utilize. Flow charting allows you to see how things flow into each other so that you're really utilizing, you know, thinking through the process, which is key. And all of these are tools that you can utilize today. Of course, you know, we can't go through all of it in an hour, but jot these down so that you can look into it, you know, in detail. Logical diagrams, right? And this allows you to see the flow of information going in and out. If you're in IT, this is a must, right? Looking at firewalls, looking at the architecture, looking at the operating systems, very important here. You also have matrix diagrams that allows you to see things between relationships, really complicated. There's a lot of automated tools out there that can help you with this, but knowing what this is sometimes half the battle, right? Test and inspection is key as part of planning for quality, because if you don't have an inspection process in place, you might not catch some of the errors, right? So your plan's going to have your standards, your objectives, your roles and responsibilities, and etc. Ultimately, as an output, what you're going to have is some testing metrics. And those metrics are going to help you create measurements, right? And that's what we want as PMs to say, am I aligned? Is there a variance or not? Now what I want to cover with you guys is project risk. I hope I'm not going too fast, but is everyone, okay, I think everyone's good, and I'm looking at chats. Now let's talk about risk. I think risk is something that the biggest misconception is that risks equals to issues. No, risk is something you plan for. Risk is, you know, something that as a PM, you want to identify every single one of your risks at the beginning, right? Planning for it, making sure that you've identified it properly. And, you know, understanding what your individual risks are and overall project risks. So here's a moment of note-taking for you. What are individual versus overall, right? And so understanding project risks at an overall, that if you had a risk, overall project risk, that may be detrimental and may need you to do a stop order for your project. So individual risks are smaller risks that you can manage, you can create mitigation plans for, or you can accept it. So it is important to understand the distinction between the two. Risks are uncertain events. However, here's some knowledge for you. Risks can be both positive or negative. And as an organization, you have to understand, or as a project, you have to understand what's my risk appetite, what are my risk tolerances, and what's my risk threshold. Really, really important to set that right at the beginning. So, and what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to pause really quickly, and that was, and I know we have 15 minutes. So I'm going to look at this in the chat box to see if there are any questions, and then I'll talk about a little bit more about what 3T Institute does and who we are and how we help in teaching you the project management concepts. But first, please put in the chat box, or like Lily said, raise your hand and ask your questions, so I can kind of help answer anything that I just went over. I mean, I covered scope, I covered quality, and I covered risk. But at a higher level, and if you want me to dive deeper in anything that I covered right now, let me know. Yep.
Do we have any questions at all for Mahjooba before she moves on? No, Mahjooba, I think we're good here.
Okay. One thing I do want to say is, as part of the Rising Network, like Lily mentioned, we're here as a resource. We're here to provide education and support you in your continued learning. So if any of the tools that I showed you, or if you're thinking, how do I manage risk, right? We did a full, we did a full risk masterclass, and I know that recording is available. And if risk management is an area where you want to learn more about, I actually did provide some tools. Definitely go back to that master class, because I think it's going to give you an added information in terms of what is risk versus an issue. How do I manage it on a daily basis on my project? How do I engage my stakeholders? So we do have that class if you want to look back on it. In terms of 3T Institute and what we do from a educational perspective, right? Part of our goal is to bring you education that you can easily digest and also easily apply on your jobs. We were established in 2019 as a like I indicated, a post-vocational school, or a secondary school that has credit units associated with it. So all of our courses, you don't have to sit for an examination to get a certificate. So you can actually get a certificate in project management from 3T Institute without even sitting for the exam. Now, you can sit for the exam and become a certified project manager through the Project Management Institute, but you don't have to if you just want to gain the knowledge. Part of what we do is we have an e-learning approach where it's self-paced plus coaching and accountability. The coaching is a tier that we're very proud of, because it really allows you to ask hands-on questions to say, how do I apply this concept on my project? And so, the feedback that we're getting is that approach is really helping individuals be successful and contribute better as team members. And so that's really what we do. 3T stands for a three-tiered approach, which is structured learning, coaching, and a student community that allows us to support you holistically. Mary, I do see your question, and I'll definitely answer those. I see a few questions there. If you're interested in taking a class with me, I do offer a self-paced course, in that you'll walk away with understanding that entire diagram that I showed you, the 5 process groups, the 49 processes, and also the 10 knowledge areas. I'm currently enrolling, so if you're interested, I'm going to go ahead and share that link with you, and you can definitely register for that, and I would be more than happy to have you in the class. But the course is updated for the newer version of the exam, which does include Agile. So you would be learning about Agile, how to run sprints, what's a backlog, and so on as part of the course here for project management. So if you have any questions about that, you let me know. But that's the end of my presentation. Let me go ahead and answer the questions. Okay, so Stephanie says, is the PMP recognized globally? The few project managers I know here in the UK are Prince 2 certified. Is it the same certification for the US, Europe, Asia, and etc.? Great question. So yes, the PMP is a certificate that is recognized globally. But I would say maybe it's more popular in the US, but I think it is gaining some traction in Europe and so on. But Prince 2 is actually a course I offer as well. So if you're interested, I do offer Prince 2. And I think you have to look at your industry. Like if you're looking at your organization, if it's a international organization and that does business with the US, then I would go with the PMP. But it doesn't hurt to have both. In terms of frameworks, they really talk about, they really borrow from each other, if I can say that. It doesn't hurt to know both principles. I think look at the market, look at the jobs you're applying to say which one would benefit you better. There isn't a wrong or right certification. The other question is, which project management tools do you recommend exploring? Asana is great. I have heard good things about it. I have heard of Monday.com. What else? Trello is really good. I think what I want to say about that, Mary, is a tool is just a tool. It's the training. It's agreeing on using a tool, establishing the standards of wanting to use that tool as a team. And that's where you want to start from, is capturing that requirement from your organization to say, why do we want to use this tool? And just getting those requirements and then putting some standards together. But Asana, Monday.com, Trello, all of them are great tools. There's Atlassian, so any of those are great. For me, honestly, as a PM, I'd like to keep things simplified. Sometimes an Excel sheet can go a long way, or Microsoft Project Schedule is actually one of my favorites as well that I utilize.
Lovely. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Thank you.
So I've got one, Mahjooba. It's more about learning from your experience. Have you been in a project whereby you've looked at the risks and you've mapped them all out, but something comes up? And then what did you do from that?
Say that last part one more time. You said something comes up. That what? I'm sorry.
Comes up within the project that puts projects at risk, but it wasn't identified initially in your risks, when you're looking at the risks. So what was it, and then what did you do?
Yeah, great question. So, and that's inevitable. It happens in every project. And one of the things that a project manager needs to do is understand its authority levels within an organization. A lot of times that risks come up, you really can't do anything but escalate it, right? First, there's two things I'm going to talk about here. There are contingency plans, and then there's management reserves and contingency reserves. As a project manager, you're going to set aside some pool of money that's going to cover all of the risks you have identified. Then you're going to also set aside a pool of money for the risks that are unknown unknowns, that if they do happen, you have a little bit of money set aside that you're going to cover that risk. Now, on a project, what I would do is establish a governance, some sort of a governance structure where you have meetings with leadership, so that if a risk were to come up, that you're not the only person making a decision and that you're communicating it. But before you even communicate it, understanding its impact on the schedule, the cost and quality of a project, so that when you do go to communicate it, you understand its full impact. And then making that decision with leadership and then trickling it down to the team. And there might be times where you also have to say, what part of the project is this risk impacting? Is it the overall, or is it an activity? Is it a work package? So knowing all of that upfront will allow you to really know what your next steps are going to be. But as PMs, like I said, we cover ourselves by having those management and contingency reserves. So from a funding perspective, you should have a little bit of money covering it. But there are risks where they're so big, and we think about the pandemic that happened, right? They're so big where projects just have to say, stop work. We just cannot move forward. But whatever that is, a lot of times the PM alone doesn't have that authority, nor should you be making that decision by yourself. You should be establishing some sort of a leadership governance team that you're making that decision with.
Thank you. So we've got a few more minutes. Does anybody want to share a project that they're working on, or if they need help with a specific area? You've got Mahjooba here. You can get some coaching. Would anybody like to share if they're working on a project and if they've got a challenge and if they need help? I'm looking at the faces. No, Mary's saying no. Margot, what about yourself? Do you have anything? No. Deb, Ryan, Mary, no.
Thank you.
No, okay. So Mahjooba, tell us a little bit about Scrum.
Well, Scrum is, Scrum is definitely
Sorry, you're muted, Mahjooba.
Sorry, I don't know how that happened. Okay, so when it comes to Scrum, and we're going to have a workshop for that as well. And so Scrum is one of the principles of Agile. Agile is a project management methodology that's very popular, or started off being popular in the software development industry. Agile is about making things lean, being efficient, being okay with change, planning things in sprints. So whether that's a 2-week, 4-week, or a 6-week sprint, coming back together with your team and saying, what did we learn in the first 2 weeks? Reprioritizing your requirements and planning the rest. So Scrum is your ability. Scrum is actually a role on a project team. You can become a certified Scrum Master, which allows you to run these daily meetings. They're 15 minutes long, and you ask 3 questions. What did you work on yesterday? What are you working on today? And what are your roadblocks? So as a Scrum Master, you have to be able to have those interpersonal skills and not be afraid to ask those tough project management questions. So essentially, it's this really important facilitator role. And when we're talking about Agile, that role is known as a Scrum Master. And running a Scrum means you're effectively running these daily meetings so that you can eliminate or remove roadblocks.
Explanation with you, and I think everyone's just writing that down. Team meetings. What did you do yesterday? What have you done today? And what are your roadblocks? And I can see Mary Rose particularly enjoyed that. So Mary, I hope you'll come to our session with Mahjooba. That's in July. So I think let's wrap up. Thanks for the thumbs up, Ryan. Let's wrap up. We've got a minute to go. Mahjooba, that was so insightful. So much information there, jam-packed into an hour. Big virtual round of applause, and thank you from my
Thank you.